At 7:42 a.m. on August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay's number 3 engine tore itself apart over Iwo Jima, and the atomic age did not begin. The B-29 Superfortress, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets and carrying the uranium gun-type weapon code named Little Boy, had departed Tinian only hours before on a mission meant to end the war in a single flash. Instead, oil pressure collapsed, the second engine seized, and Tibbets was forced into a screaming low-altitude emergency descent toward the volcanic airstrip that Marines had secured at such terrible cost only 5 months earlier. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. The aircraft struck the coral runway at an oblique angle, cartwheeled, and broke apart near the edge of Motoyama Field No. 1. Miraculously, the weapon did not detonate. The gun-type design required a precise ballistic slamming of one uranium mass into another, and the impact instead sheared the propellant assembly cleanly from the target rings, scattering components across several hundred yards of debris. Military police cordoned the site within 20 minutes. General Leslie Groves, reached by encrypted cable at the Pentagon, ordered every fragment recovered and flown to Los Alamos under armed escort. But the cordon came minutes too late. Among the Korean laborers conscripted to clear Japanese remains from the island's caves, 2 men whose names would never appear in any American after-action report pocketed what looked like heavy metal washers from the smoldering tail section. They did not know what they carried. They only knew that anything the Americans guarded this desperately was worth smuggling home. What no one on Iwo Jima understood that morning, what would not surface in Washington for another 11 months, would bend the second half of the 20th century into a shape no planner had imagined. In the Oval Office, the news arrived as a single sentence delivered by Secretary of War Henry Stimson. The device was lost, the aircraft was down, and there would be no demonstration. President Harry Truman, barely 4 months into the office he had inherited from Franklin Roosevelt, sat silent for a long moment before asking the only question that mattered. How long until another one? Groves answered carefully. The uranium pipeline at Oak Ridge had been producing weapons-grade material at a trickle for nearly 2 years, and the stockpile that had fed Little Boy represented almost the entire national supply. A second gun-type weapon realistically lay 6 to 9 months away. The Joint Chiefs moved within hours. General George Marshall pressed for immediate authorization of Operation Olympic, the November assault on Kyushu that had been drawn up through the spring. Admiral King urged continued blockade. Stimson, shaken but methodical, argued for patience. Bockscar and the Fat Man plutonium device could still fly against Japan within weeks, and the Trinity test on July 16th had already proven the implosion physics worked. Yet Trinity remained classified at the highest levels, and the political calculation was not physics. It was time. Time ran out on August 9th. Soviet armies, honoring the pledge Stalin had made at Yalta, poured across the Manchurian border in a 3-pronged offensive that shattered the Kwantung Army within a week. Truman now faced a war he could neither end quickly nor abandon, and a partner whose appetite grew with every mile of Asian territory. Fat Man waited on Tinian. The plutonium core, hand-delivered from Los Alamos, sat in its lead-lined container while argument consumed Washington. The question was no longer whether to use it, but whether a single implosion weapon, unsupported by follow-up strikes, could force the Supreme Council for the direction of the war to capitulate. Stimson's analysts concluded it could not. A lone detonation, however terrible, might be absorbed by the militarist faction as an act of God or a singular American trick, particularly without a credible threat of sustained atomic bombardment. Groves made the decision few others could have made. He ordered Fat Man held in reserve and redirected every available resource: calutrons, gaseous diffusion cascades, the thermal columns at Y-12, toward accelerating U-235 production. The next uranium bomb, he told Truman, would be ready by summer 1946. It was a gamble that traded the shock of August for the certainty of a campaign. Operation Olympic was formally authorized on August 14th, the same day Emperor Hirohito, in a palace meeting that would never be made public, rejected the Potsdam terms and accepted War Minister Anami's assurance that the home islands could still be defended. The uranium rings traveled slowly. The 2 Korean laborers carried them for 3 weeks inside a rice sack, passed through the black markets of Osaka, and eventually reached a naval intelligence officer who recognized, from captured American technical bulletins, what he was looking at. The components were transferred to the submarine I-401, the largest undersea vessel ever built, and delivered in late September to Konan on the eastern coast of occupied Korea, where Dr. Yoshio Nishina had quietly relocated the Riken Institute's atomic research group. Nishina held the rings in his gloved hands and understood at once what the Americans had nearly done. The NEGO project, starved for years of both ore and electrical power, had never approached critical assembly. Now, with intact target rings of enriched uranium and the technical diagrams recovered from the German submarine U-234, surrendered to the Americans in May but partially copied by Japanese liaison officers in Kiel before her final voyage, a gun-type weapon was no longer theoretical. It was a matter of supplementing what had arrived from Iwo Jima with every gram Japan could enrich in the mountains of Konan. The work began in secret. It would not remain secret forever. On November 1, 1945, 14 American divisions came ashore on the beaches of southern Kyushu. The landings at Miyazaki, Ariake Bay, and Kushikino met resistance that no Pentagon projection had fully anticipated. Japanese intelligence, warned by the unusual pattern of pre-invasion bombardment, had repositioned the 40th, 206th, and 212th Divisions into layered defensive belts. The terrain, steep and compartmented, funneled American armor into killing zones prepared for months. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi unleashed what he had been building since the Philippines. Not dozens of kamikaze aircraft, but thousands. Training planes, obsolete fighters, even modified trainers with fixed bombs in their noses, flew in waves timed to saturate picket destroyers and overwhelm combat air patrols. Within 6 weeks, American casualties on Kyushu exceeded 70,000, and the hospital ships at Okinawa could no longer accept wounded. In Washington, Truman read the casualty lists each evening. Stimson, aging visibly, told him that the war would continue into 1947. Through the Korean winter, Nishina's team worked by the light of hydroelectric power drawn from the Chosin Reservoir. The Konan facility, built originally for industrial ammonia synthesis, housed a crude but functional thermal diffusion plant that supplemented the Iwo Jima uranium with domestic enrichment at roughly a gram per day. Slow, agonizing, but cumulative. By March 1946, Nishina estimated the critical mass was within reach before autumn. Soviet intelligence did notice. NKVD observers in northern Korea reported unusual power draws, armed perimeters, and the arrival of physicists whose names appeared in pre-war academic journals. But Moscow's analysts, fixated on the recent American atomic rumors from New Mexico and uncertain of their own incomplete program under Kurchatov, misread the signatures. The consensus report filed in April 1946 concluded that Konan was a chemical weapons facility, Tabun or sarin derivatives, of the kind the Germans had pioneered. The mistake would cost Stalin the strategic initiative he thought he had seized. At 1:02 a.m., on July 14, 1946, a second uranium gun-type weapon detonated at 600 meters above Kokura. The city, spared in the original August target list only by weather, burned under a fireball that reached nearly 4,000 degrees at its center. Approximately 70,000 people died in the first minute. Truman, informed by telephone, authorized no public statement beyond a brief acknowledgement that the weapon used on Japan was of a new and terrible type. He waited for the surrender that had followed Hiroshima in the history that would never be written. The surrender did not come. On July 25, seismographs in Vladivostok, Manila, and Honolulu registered a sharp, shallow event in the Hamgyong Mountains of northern Korea. American intelligence, scrambling, confirmed within 72 hours what Nishina had accomplished. A low-yield detonation, perhaps 2 kilotons, crude by Manhattan Project standards, but unmistakable. Japan had become the world's third nuclear power. The Konan test was broadcast across Tokyo radio on July 28, and for the first time since Pearl Harbor, the American public understood that victory was no longer a matter of will. Operation Coronet, the planned assault on the Kanto Plain scheduled for March 1946, had already been postponed by the Kyushu casualties. It was now cancelled outright. No American general would authorize an amphibious landing against an enemy capable of detonating a uranium device above the invasion fleet. Truman, in a private cable to Churchill, wrote that the bomb had changed everything twice, first by its absence, now by its proliferation. Negotiations opened in Bern in September 1946. The Swiss mediated. Stalin denied the Korean peninsula he had expected to inherit, accepted a partition along the 38th parallel that placed the northern half under Soviet administration and the southern half, including Konan, within a Japanese sphere that Tokyo now called the co-prosperity residual. The imperial institution was preserved. The emperor remained. War crimes tribunals were conducted by Japanese authorities under nominal Allied observation, and their findings were quiet. The Kyoto Armistice, signed on December 12, 1946, did not end the atomic age so much as inaugurate a new one. Three powers now held the weapon, and none trusted the others. The Cold War of the history we know never materialized in that shape. In its place rose a tripolar standoff across the Pacific that would shape the remainder of the century, each capital watching the others, each remembering that the first bomb of the age had been lost on a volcanic runway, and that everything which followed had flowed from a single failing engine.